What is it? British Horse
Loggers. That's the organisation. So I'll tell you. I'll tell you a bit about Roy first, and then I'll tell you a bit about us because he's the most interesting bit. So this is Easton Roy. He is 12 years old, and he is a Suffolk Punch. So I don't know if any of you know very much about heavy horses, but so there's 3 types of heavy horses in the UK traditionally. You've got your Shire, you've got your Clydesdale, and you've got your Suffolk. So the Shire horse is the most commonly known workhorse, and it's the one that you see in all the pictures with the big hairy legs, big tall thing, usually black and white, sometimes brown and white. And those horses started off actually not as farm horses but as war horses. So Henry VIII and the English kings before him, they all kept getting beaten by the French because the French had big horses that were much good at charging over the top of our soldiers. So Henry VIII went, right, well I want some big horses as well. So he banned the export of big horses and the gelding of big horses, and he also started importing horses from all over Europe to try and build up his, what was at the time, you know, cutting edge technology as far as war was concerned. As he was doing that, people started to work out that horses were actually quite good for other things as well, because oxen were mainly used for farming at that point. They realised these bigger, more intelligent horses were actually really good for farming. So they started to use them to plough with, and that's where the kind of heavy horses came out of. And the heavy horses divided into sort of 3 lots. You had the ones in the north in Scotland, the ones in most of the country, and then East Anglia. Now East Anglia was slightly different because we've got really heavy clay soils, and if you've got a horse with big hairy legs, big long legs, they will struggle in really heavy soils. So the East Anglians started to breed a slightly different kind of heavy horse, and that's where the Suffolk came out of. And they're the oldest pedigree breed of horse in the UK, and they date back from the 1500s. They're incredibly rare now, so there is only about 500 of this breed of horse left in the world.
What's the name of the breed?
The Suffolk Punch.
Oh yeah.
So that's the kind of horse that would have been used in East Anglia all the way down to here. So in Highlands Park, where we're based in Chelmsford. So there's 2 Highlands Parks locally. We're in the Chelmsford one. There's pictures of the old owners with Suffolk Punches that were working the land there. So the reason that we went for Suffolks is because they're the traditional horse to this area, but also because they're really good at what we want them to do, which is to pull logs. So all horses can pull stuff, but what you want is a short, strong leg, a really stout body, big lungs, and also the willingness to pull, and that's what you get with a Suffolk. And the reason that we use horses rather than machinery to pull timber is because they're much more sensitive than using machines. So I started off in conservation and forestry using machines, and saw what damage that they were doing, and I looked for alternatives, and I found that people were using horses, which I thought was very kind of traditional and a bit backwards perhaps, but then I realised how efficient and useful the horses could be, and it just so happened that Claudia at the time was working with heavy horses I haven't introduced myself, at Capel Manor College just down the road, and they had Shires and Clydesdales down there, and so we kind of, and I was into forestry, so we kind of combined our expertise to create our business, which is called Hawthorn Heavy Horses. So we're part of an organisation called the British Horse Loggers, which you'll see on my t-shirt. We're approved contractors. There's only about 10 of us in the country who are approved contractors through the BHL, and that's because we've proved over a number of years our kind of, history and expertise in using horses in forestry. Anybody who's watching, I think it was Country File at the weekend,
yeah,
may have seen
it.
Kate Humble with one of our friends, Kate, logging with one of her horses, and she's the chair of the BHL. We're currently committee members as well. So there's a few of us about doing it, but it's quite a kind of rare skill still. There's probably only about somewhere between 50 and 100 people who are regularly using horses in the UK for forestry work, of which only a handful of those make a living out of it. So, which we are one of them. So Roy is wearing a Scandinavian harness. So there's lots of different styles of harness and things that you can buy to use with your horses. We like this implement here, which is called a Scandinavian timber arch, which allows us to lift one end of the log off the ground, and it has shafts, so it makes it much easier for the horse going up and downhill. We could just have chains coming off the harness and attach the logs to those chains, which I think you might have seen if you were watching Kate Humble at the weekend. And that's fine, we do use that. But for long drags like this on relatively kind of easy ground, especially where we're trying to protect the path a little bit, we don't want to drag the whole length of the log along the ground because it will cause damage. And it's also harder for him. It's harder for him than it needs to be. And basically he can pull twice as much, or it's half as hard for the same size log with this in comparison to dragging it along the ground. It takes a little bit more manoeuvring, but it's worth it. The main part of the harness is this is the collar. This is what he pushes into. This is basically a big pad, big comfortable pad, which has got these things attached to it, which are called hames, which are the strong part of the harness. And then that's where everything that you pull gets attached to. So you'll see that we've got this big strap here that gets attached to the shaft. And he pushes into that collar, and then that drags along the logs. So Roy's been doing this job since he started doing it when he was about 3. Very lightly, so because you can't work the horse, it's a bit like asking a teenager to lift really heavy weights. It's not good for their joints and everything else. But you also want to start learning how to do it. So Roy started learning how to log at 3, and by the time he was 5 he was doing light commercial work, and by the time he was 7 he was fully trained and good to go. And he's 12 now, so he's been working properly for the last 5 years or so, and he really enjoys it. He's very keen to work. This isn't something we have to force him to do. He skipped into the trailer this morning. He was quite happy to come out and knew what he was going to do. And so there is a perception that working horses, is perhaps not kind to them. But he weighs about 900 kilos, and you try and make a 900 kilo animal do something that they don't want to do. And you can't do it through fear, because if you scare them, they're going to run off. So it's a partnership between us and them. They get lots of lovely food and treats while they're out with us, so they like to come out. And the exercise, we don't ask them to do more than they're capable of doing, and it keeps them fit. And the fitter they are, just like us, kind of generally the healthier they are and the happier they are. So it's something he likes to do. Sometimes he gets a bit too keen and wants to go a bit too fast, but not very often. Yeah. He's generally pretty laid back. He's used to working around tractors and machinery and chainsaws and all sorts of stuff, dogs. He's not bothered by very much. He had a good look at the deer this morning, because I don't think he's ever seen so many deer in one place on the scratch. And he was a bit unsure about what they were all doing, but yeah, other than that, he takes it all in stride. So generally the way we will work is I'll drive him from behind, so we've got these long reins here, and I'll be walking behind him, as you might have seen when I just did that little test run just now. We'll use chains around the log, and then this has got a ratcheting system that allows us to put the chain into it and then ratchets the chains up, which lifts the log off the ground. So for our next gap that we're going to fill, so we're using these logs to fill gaps to try and dissuade people from cycling through the gaps in the hedge. We need a long one, so we're going to take one of these longer logs. I'm just going to move him out of the way, and then you can see how it all works. So I'm just going to back him up. Back, back, back. Hook or peaving chain. So what we do is put the chain next to the log, and then we can use our PV to roll it out. Not helpful that the log behind it is rolling onto the chain that I've just got underneath, but we'll soon sort that out. Go. And then the chain has got an eye on it at one end and a needle at the other. We just put it through like so, and that's now choked on. Now you can see that we've now got, rather than dragging the log along the ground, which has lots of friction, We've now got 90% of the log off the ground. He's got most of the weight on these wheels. The wheels roll really nicely, and so he can move this. This is probably about 200, 250 kilos of log.